Hello, everyone. We're finally coming to an end with the Cold War. This is the last part that we're going to do before the review and the test. And we're going to start off with the impact of the Cold War at home. So, we're talking about what's going on in the United States while the Cold War is happening. And the fear of communism and the threat of nuclear war affected American life throughout the Cold War. And American citizens were urged by the government to build bomb shelters in their own home. And people thought that these shelters would protect them if an atomic bomb was ever dropped. So essentially, the government actually asked people to build these shelters. These are underneath houses. People would build them. It had lots of concrete. And the belief was if a nuclear bomb went off, you would go under here and you would be safe. You would have some beds. You'd have to put food because you'd have to live there for a while if there ever was an atomic bomb. And these are kind of some examples. This is one where people would have to build it, use bricks. You need an opening, put your food here, put a bed here. And here are some other ones. There's actually some homes in Virginia that you can still buy that have bomb shelters inside of them. And there's lots of countries lots of states where you can go in the United States and you can buy an old house from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and they have bomb shelters inside of them. And during the 1950s and 1960s, American schools regularly held drills to train children in what to do in case of a nuclear attack. And in these drills, students would hit the floor, duck underneath a desk or table, and cover their heads with their hands. So if there was ever a bell saying a nuclear bomb was coming, this is what children would do. They would practice it, just like we practice tornado drills, we practice fire drills. They would have nuclear bomb drills. Next, we're going to learn about this married couple named Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. And they were Americans convicted of spying for the Soviet Union as informants. They were sharing atomic bomb secrets with the Soviet Union. So all that means is they illegally gave the Soviet Union information on how to build atomic bombs. They were spies is what they were. And these trials increased the domestic fears of communism. And when we say domestic, that just means American in this case. So people in the United States, they were afraid that people could be spies for the Soviet Union. The Rosenbergs, they were spies. They gave the Soviet Union information. They helped them build atomic bombs. Uh, yeah. And the Rosenbergs were convicted solely on the basis of a confession of one of their informants. And there are some who still believe they were innocent. So some people think they actually didn't help the Soviet Union. Most people do, but either way, they were found guilty. And they were offered a lesser sentence in exchange for their confession, but they refused and were executed. So the government actually said, if you confess, we're going to send you to prison for 10 years, or if you don't confess, we're going to kill you. And they didn't confess. They went to trial. They were found guilty, and they were actually put to death. They died. Next, we're going to learn about a senator named Joseph McCarthy. And he played on American fears of communism by recklessly accusing many American government officials, military, and other citizens of being communists based on flimsy or no evidence. So the big thing is lots of times he had no evidence. He simply would just go on TV and he said people were communists even though he had no proof. He would say certain politicians were communists. He might say an actor is communist. He would just accuse lots of people of being communist. But if someone accused you of being communist, it was very bad. You wouldn't be able to get a job. You wouldn't be able to be in movies anymore. You couldn't be a politician. And this led to the coining of the term McCarthyism. And you might hear that sometimes with politicians or just people when they say McCarthyism. That just means making false accusations based on rumor or guilt by association. So essentially no proof. And what McCarthy would do if one of your friends or let's say your brother was found guilty of being communist, he would accuse you of being communist and you'd probably be found guilty of it as well. So it was definitely not good because he didn't have any evidence, he had no proof, but he said a lot of people were communists. Now we're going to specifically talk about the Cold War in Virginia and the heavy military expenditures, which means costs, throughout the Cold War benefited Virginia's economy proportionally more than any other state. And many local private companies were awarded large defense contracts. So essentially, what you have to know is Virginia got a lot of money because the government spent a lot of money in military. The Pentagon, which is not that far from here, received a lot of money. A lot of companies started here because they were selling weapons to the government, selling planes to the government. So Virginia, more than any other state, benefited from the Cold War. And this is especially true in these two parts of Virginia, the Hampton Roads, because that's home to several large naval and air bases. So they built naval bases, they built air bases, a lot of people moved there, they needed boats, they needed planes. So Hampton Roads did very well. And the other part is Northern Virginia, home to the Pentagon and numerous private companies that contract with the military. So a lot of people that sell stuff to the military are in Northern Virginia. So those are the two places in Virginia that benefited. So now it's the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. And there's three reasons why the Soviet Union fell and collapsed. One of them is the rising nationalism in Soviet republics. So a lot of these countries that were in the Soviet Union, they no longer wanted to be part of the Soviet Union. They didn't want to be called Soviet Union. They wanted to be Czechoslovakia, or they wanted to be Slovakia. They no longer wanted to be part of the Soviet Union. And the other one is increasing Soviet military expenses. So they were trying to match the United States. They were spending lots of money. The problem is the Soviet Union did not have that much money. So it didn't do well when they kept increasing their spending on military, because you can't just focus on the military if you're a country. You have to worry about food, you have to have infrastructure, you have to have roads, you have to have good schools, but they didn't have those things. They just spent all of their money on the military. And there was the economic inefficiency of communism and fast-paced reforms. So communism, remember, that's where everybody gets paid the same, everybody gets the same stuff, people don't choose what they want to buy, the government chooses. It doesn't work very well, and over time, the economy went down. They were just losing too much money. It just wasn't going very well. Whereas democratic countries that had the capitalist economy, their economies were doing better. So that's part of the reason why the Soviet Union fell. Next, we're going to talk about the role of Ronald Reagan. So he was elected president in 1980. And he instituted a policy of massive military buildup. So he made the U.S. military the biggest in the world. He spent a lot of money on the military, and he made sure that we had the best weapons, we had the best airplanes, the best boats, we had military all over the world. And he also supported the development of the Strategic Defense Initiative, commonly known as Star Wars. It would utilize space satellites to shoot down offensive nuclear warheads before reaching the United States. So all that is, the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as SDI or Star Wars, is, let's say the Soviet Union launches a missile towards the United States. What's going to happen is we have satellites up in the sky, and they're going to detect the missiles, and they're going to shoot them down before they can hit the United States. So it's a way to protect the United States, because we destroy the missiles before they get to us. And Reagan also challenged the moral legitimacy of the Soviet Union with strong rhetoric, and he has a famous speech where he said, "Tear down this wall," during his speech at the Berlin Wall. Just as a reminder, Berlin is the capital of Germany, and it was divided by a wall. The Soviet Union, they put a wall right in the middle of Berlin, and Eastern Berlin was communist, Western Berlin was democratic. And ultimately, President Reagan and Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev agreed to terms of arms reduction in the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, also known as START. And all this meant is the United States and the Soviet Union agreed to get rid of most of their atomic weapons. So they decide we don't need to have all these weapons anymore. They said it was dangerous, so they start getting rid of their weapons. And on November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall was torn down. And, a lot of people in Berlin were very excited about this because if you were on one side of the wall, you lived in communist Soviet Union. If you're on this side, you're democratic. But a lot of people, they have family over on the other side. They were not able to see anybody. Some people, it took 40, 30, 20 years, they weren't able to see their relatives or their friends because the wall divided them. But when it was torn down, people literally got axes, they just got equipment from their house, and they started knocking all this stuff down. And that's when the wall was torn down. And the Soviet Union finally collapses, and it ended for good in 1991, and it officially ended the Cold War. That's it. Make sure you guys do some studying. We have the review coming up, and then the test will be pretty soon. If you have any questions, let me know.